If you've ever worked with a toxic coworker or manager, you know how fast that can make your regular workday just become exhausting. You start second guessing every move, avoiding certain people, and carrying stress throughout your workday and home. And if you don't respond well, you can let your behavior actually contribute to the problem. You make the situation worse and harder to fix and more stressful for yourself and those around you. We're going to talk about 3 healthy ways to address this problem without letting it get worse and without pretending it doesn't happen. You don't sweep it under the rug. You can protect your boundaries, communicate clearly, and stop one toxic person from affecting the culture around you. Now, I tend to get a little bit uppity, I think, when I hear toxic, because you hear it so much these days. And you hear it applied to so many things. But really what you're describing is a situation that's always been there. People who push your boundaries, who affect your culture, and who make your workplace an unsafe and unpleasant environment, who contribute to what we'd call a degenerative work culture. So the first thing we want to address is, how do you deal with it? We don't pretend it's not happening. You don't just shoulder it and push it under the rug until you break out or you're dreading coming to work. What's the first step in dealing with this?
Well, you mentioned the what not to do, right? And that's so important. I had a friend and a mentor when I was young who had a term called gunny sacking. And for people my age, we kind of know what a gunny sack is, and people older than me, but you might not know what a gunny sack is. It's just a big bag. A gunny sack is a sack that you just put a lot of stuff in. Oftentimes it would be, in the old days, an old feed sack that was used on a farm or ranch, or just a very large bag you just put all your stuff in. And so he said sometimes people just gunny sack stuff. It means I take it and I take it and I take it and I just put it in my bag, and my sack gets heavier and I carry it around and carry it around. And now here's the dangerous part. 1, that wears you down. But 2, at some point you've had enough. And when you get that last little bit and you think, I can't take any more, it all comes out. So you dump your gunny sack out on whoever put that last straw on your camel's back, right?
And then you're the crazy one.
To mix the metaphors, right? And you're a nut, right? They think, what is wrong with you? I just asked what you want for lunch. And you think, how dare you not know what I want for lunch? Totally unreasonable. So that's one of the dangers, is if you take that sort of thing too long, over time, it wears on your own reason and your emotions take over. So first thing, deal with it quickly. Another friend that I worked with years ago said, bad news always sells best fresh. If you don't deal with the bad news early, it doesn't get better. It's like that old fish you put on your counter and forget to cook, and it sits there, and over time it's going to stink and stink. And you can't say, well, later I'll cook it, right? Later it's too rotten. You can't even eat the stuff. You can't stomach it. Conflict can be like that. So making sure that you deal with it quickly is very important. It's honestly the easiest time to do it. Now, it doesn't mean you deal with it abruptly or on the spot always, although you might if you're prepared. You might need to take a moment or two to prepare, to get your own house in order, to sort out the facts from your stories so that you are dealing with facts, right? So first off, deal with it quickly. Deal with it, and maybe let me edit myself, and maybe you'll edit this later, but I don't mean abruptly when I say quickly, but deal with it in a timely manner. Don't let it set and weigh on you. A number of things do happen. Like we talked about the stinky fish scenario, right? But the other thing is the more you let it weigh on you, the more your reality gets distorted by this experience you've had. At first I'm offended, but early on I can usually see both sides of the story if I challenge myself. The longer it takes, the more I reinforce my own perspective of what happened, and my reality gets less and less true over time, the more I let something weigh on me. Deal with it quickly. And then this idea that I just introduced into the conversation is know how to separate your facts, the facts, from your stories about the facts. What are you assuming about the person's intent? Assuming good intent can keep you thinking healthy and in the conversation. I don't know if that person had good intent or not, and you don't either. But if you assume good intent, you make a conversation more possible, and you will have it in a way that where you're not creating a downward spiral where you're starting to feed off of each other's negative emotions. So those two things are some things that I would say definitely start out with. Be responsive and timely in dealing with this. Very often, that takes care of a problem. Somebody steps on your toes and you say, hey, that's not okay, and here's why. Here's what you just did. How often do people say, oh, I'm sorry, that wasn't my intent? Now they know where your boundaries are, which leads us into the second thing. Establish those boundaries. Let that person know that you're working with, that this is what I consider respectful and productive interaction, and this is over the line. Right? I'm not going to be called names. I'm not going to be shut out of meetings that I ought to be in. I'm not going to be whatever that toxicity looks like for you. There's a scripture that in essence says, the exact verse doesn't come to mind right now, but woe unto those who, it has to do with seeking offense, right? Make sure that you're not actually seeking offense. If this is somebody who has bothered you for a while, odds are you're painting them with a brush that anything that comes out of their mouth might be seen as toxic. You have labeled them as toxic. Be willing to examine the labels you put on other people, and rethink them a little bit from time to time to say, wait a second, what's the other side of this story? So as you re-examine those labels, understand the stories that you tell yourself. There's about 3 basic stories that we tell ourselves when we see someone as toxic, right? They're called victim, villain, and helpless stories. I'm a victim of somebody else's behavior. That person's a villain. They have bad intent. They're out to get me. And I'm helpless. I've tried everything, and nothing I can do works. This person is just downright evil. I don't know how to deal with that evil person anymore. Now, they might be. One thing, a real quick aside, never tolerate abuse. So we're not talking about serious harassment or abuse. If that's happening, please deal with that in the ways that are appropriate through your HR department or through some other reporting avenue available to you. But don't tolerate yourself or others being abused. We're talking about a strained, intense working relationship, and how can you make that better? So, victim story. One thing I love is that when you start to feel stressed, learn to ask yourself a question. When you're stressed, you go into fight or flight mode. Your brain shuts down literally, and the blood starts. It's kind of like we're wired. If you get attacked by a tiger, right? You get mugged, you get whatever. Your brain shuts down, and all your blood just makes your muscles work better, faster, right? That's what. And if you're attacked, that works fine. But what if it's a coworker? You don't want to just beat up the person. I'm telling you, don't do it. It won't work. It doesn't help, right? So when you feel that stress, what's really cool is learning to ask yourself questions under stress keeps your higher brain functioning. You need to be able to function reasonably and based on facts, not on your emotions alone. So back to where we were. If it's a victim story, what am I pretending not to know about my role in this situation? Is a great question. I promise you'll find an answer to that. If it's an interaction that's been going on for a while, what am I pretending not to know about my role will help you be more fair-minded. Now, please understand what I'm not saying. It's all your fault, and you're the toxic person, and the other person's your victim. I hope that's not true. Chances are it's not. What it does, it gives you that balanced perspective so that you can move forward and solve the problem and not let it build up and create a gunny sack situation for you. So asking that first question, if I'm feeling like a victim, what am I pretending not to know about my role in this situation?
I've heard you say acceptable behavior is whatever you allow. Have you been allowing this for a long period of time? And then it's going to come as a surprise when you stop. So it's something in your behavior that just needs to send this signal that, this is something I'm not going to allow happen to me. You can't control other people, but I'm not going to be part of this anymore.
So if I've been disrespectful to you over time and you've never said anything, I assume that's just our relationship and it's okay with you. Maybe it's my sense of humor. Maybe it's my way of being familiar. Maybe it's my way of breaking down barriers when I'm actually building barriers. Right? I just don't know because you never said, hey, I don't like that. Don't call me that. Don't. Years ago, I was young, in my early 20s, and I worked in a group home serving people who had developmental disabilities, different forms of what we then called mental retardation or slow mentality. The phraseology, the terminology has changed over time, but I think we still use. And I haven't done that type of work since I was very young, but I was the lead or the manager of a group home where we had 5 or 6, mostly young men, living in that group home, and there were about 4 of us young men who worked there as their caregivers and what were called house parents, I think, at the time. But anyway, we just played. We had fun just as a group, all 10 of us, and we'd get out and play basketball. And one of and I'll make up a name for him. This was so many years ago that's irrelevant, but out of respect. There was one of the young men who lived there, we'll call him Bob, big, strong, stout, and awkward in his movements. And when we played basketball together, he would just grab the ball and run for the net and throw the ball up. And if you were in his way, you just got knocked down. So we would laugh and say, okay, here comes a freight train. And we'd laugh and joke about him running toward the net and we better, get out of the way. And one day I kind of looked at him and realized, he doesn't perceive the way we perceive. He doesn't perceive that might happen to me. I had no arc to my shot. I never was a great basketball player, ever. So I would make an outside shot. Maybe it'd go in. Odds were probably 80% it wasn't going to because I wasn't that good. And one of the guys would say, hey, John, what did Noah have that you don't have? I said, I don't know what. He said, an arc. My ball had no arc when I shot. So anyway, I laughed, he laughed, and I thought nothing of it. This obviously I remember it because, again, it happened but it never hurt. It was fun, right? And so we made that assumption about the people around us. But one day I stopped the game, called a timeout, and said, I got a question for you, Bob. And he said, what's that? I said, we all tease each other. I said, when you get the ball and run for the ball, when we tease you, does that hurt your feelings at all, or are you okay with that? And he stopped and had to think about it. He said, John, that hurts. It makes me sad. I said, buddy, that's never going to happen again. And it never did, right? So acceptable behavior was whatever we allowed it to be. And he didn't know how to have that conversation, so I had to figure it out. And sometimes you can do that too, catch yourself. So giving that grace to someone else can be very helpful, being able to kind of realize acceptable behavior is whatever you allow it to be. So I need to make sure people know that it's not acceptable, and here's why.
When you're setting these boundaries, you guys still played together. You didn't.
It was even more fun afterwards.
It was more fun. It made it better. So that's when you're setting the boundaries and you're thinking ahead. Remember, these people aren't going to disappear. And odds are they're probably good people who didn't realize something.
Usually. And additionally, if they have an axe to grind against you, why?
Yeah.
Maybe they are mad at you. And they're not good at telling you why. And there's a problem that could have been solved if they weren't being all passive aggressive about it or whatever's coming across, right? So that's the victim. For villain, the question to ask yourself when you're telling yourself that story is, why would a reasonable, rational, and decent person do that? Why would they? Now, be a little harder on yourself than you might want to be in this situation, because it might be too easy to say, well, that's not a problem to answer that question because they're irrational and they're not decent. Work a little harder. Why would a reasonable, rational, and decent person do this thing that looks irrational and not decent? Assuming a good intent. I love the statement, assume good intent. And then the final is the helpless story. I've tried everything. I promise you haven't. And the odds are you haven't tried dialogue. Now, if you had, okay, it didn't work. what's the next best thing to do? I don't mean next best thing as in second best thing. I mean is what's the best thing to do now? Because this thing wasn't the best thing. It didn't help. One thing that I will say is understand the principle of influence as opposed to the concept of control. There's a reason our business is called Influence on Purpose. We know that as leaders and as coworkers, we don't have control of other people. So you're dealing with this perception of this toxic person isn't to control or change them. It's to inform them so they can choose to change themselves, right? You're able to influence the situation in a positive way. If you think that your job is to control it, or if I do this, it will fix the other person, you're working from a failed premise from the very beginning, and it's not going to work. It'll backfire on you. So understand the principle first and foremost, and then understand how these skills can help you.
I think it's really important to not feel helpless. One, that's mentally exhausting to feel like you're helpless, but it can also be scary. I talked to someone once who they were describing someone they had to be around a lot, and they didn't like a certain behavior. This behavior, they were loud, they slammed things, and it felt intimidating. Oh, well, have you talked to them about how this bothers you? Well, that means it's my fault. No, it's not. It doesn't mean it's your fault, but you do bear some responsibility in what you allow. From what she said, to be fair to her, this other person, it wasn't even aimed at her. It was just in her vicinity, and it made her feel some kind of way, which is loud, scary, banging noises from a person who was bigger than her. It's absolutely understandable why that makes you uncomfortable. But did you address it? How can they know if you haven't addressed it with them, that this is bothering you? But the idea that she was responsible for it was very hard to hear.
Understand that distinction, right? So one of the reasons we don't deal with toxic coworkers is we have proclaimed ourselves innocent, and we've proclaimed them the villain. And so it almost robs you of a chance to be proactive and to have a positive influence on the circumstance. So throw away this idea of blame and punishment and start figuring out, what do I really want here in terms of working relationships? And what would I do if that's what it wanted? So those are some of the skills that you can use in terms of dealing with people that we perceive as toxic. Now, remember the principles up front. It's not about controlling others. And my perception of toxicity is my perception. It may be everybody around you has that same perception. That's validating, but it doesn't mean that person's so evil they can't be spoken with, right? I know that I personally have and Rebecca, you talked about this too, have worked with people that I was able to work with productively that other people thought were toxic and they couldn't work with, right? What's the difference? I'm not the superstar. It's just I knew how to have those conversations and build trust in situations where others didn't want to approach those conversations. I wouldn't even say they didn't know how. Maybe they didn't, but they didn't approach them. They didn't try because they had told themselves it was useless from the very beginning. So I would keep those things in mind. And then finally, what if? What if I've done all that I know to do? I've done it thoughtfully, and I've tried to be true to the principles that I trust. Then what? It's okay to escalate that and contact your HR department or your manager and let them know. Now, what you've done before is homework for this should it happen. Because what you've done so far, if you've come to this point, is you've made sure you have good intent. You've given the person an opportunity to express theirs. Do this all within the context of the mission of your company, right? We have work to do, and this behavior is getting in the way of us being effective in the work we do. So I've checked my intent. I've separated my stories from the facts, right? Or my feelings from the facts. I've identified how this is affecting our work. And I've tried being proactive in dealing with the situation. Take note of that. Now, I don't mean just take note of it in your head. I mean, write it down. Here's what we talked about. Here have been my concerns. Here are the days we talked about it. Just it doesn't have to be a dossier. You're not building a case against this other person. You're just taking notes so that you can sit down with HR and say, here's what I've gone through and I need your help with this now, because I find that I'm not able to bring about a positive outcome in this situation by myself. So I'd like some help.
HR or your manager.
Or your manager, yes. So I would say as you wrap, so as you think about that, kind of in closing almost, we've gone through all those steps. We've tried to make sure we're true to the principles. We understand the mission that we share. We've gone through this process of knowing how to have dialogue with this person and set those boundaries and help them to be aware and accountable for themselves. It didn't bring about the change we hoped for. It still is for us an unbearable work situation that we do take to HR. So we have the documentation for that. How would you close this? Any thoughts?
I think long term really is to think win-win. And win for you too. If you've done all of these things, and odds are, if you've done them, you can probably do a little better. We can all be a little better. We can all think again. But if you've honestly given this good effort, use the avenues available to you to seek mediation if it's not working for the two of you alone, is this something you want to preserve? Now, it's not easy to say walk away. And you're probably not going to get anyone else fired unless there was something truly egregious. Hopefully, then action is taken. But thinking long-term, thinking well out, so is this something I need to prepare to look at other options when it's possible? And doing your best to maintain a good work environment and relationship and making sure that you are always doing what you need to do so that you can walk away and walk home at night and not carry this with you and not have it affect not only your working culture with other people who hopefully are better, but are you taking it home and letting it weigh on you there?
So I would say what I just heard is know your values. Know what your values are. If you feel disrespected, you obviously value respect. So make sure that you're living your values. And that way, regardless of the outcome, because you can't control others, you at the end of the day know that you're living a life of integrity, which means I'm living my life in alignment with the values that I cherish.
And one thing we know, it's so easy to read or hear and listen to someone talk about these things in abstract. If you have a specific situation, please share it with us in the comments or email it to us through our website, and we'd love to address specific situations.
Thank you.